Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to an episode of In the Frame. Today I'm going to talk about the 88 films box set, the Flesh and Blood show, the Pete Walker horror films. This has 7 films in it, so it's got Die Screaming Marianne, the Flesh and Blood show, House of Mortal Sin, Frightmare, The Comeback, House of Whipcord, and Schizo. Might actually be the box set of the year. Beautiful artwork, and a ton of stuff to go through. Now, I was kind of going backwards and forwards whether I should pick this up or not. I haven't had any of these in my collection. I hadn't seen any of them before that I can remember. But I thought, what the hell, I got it on eBay slightly cheaper than the RRP, so I thought, what the hell, I could be dead tomorrow, and I was really pleasantly surprised. I didn't think these would be as good and as much fun as I thought as they were. Pete Walker retired quite early after making only about 15 films. He did some sexploitation films and then he did horror films, but he claimed he never liked horror films. He just basically wanted to ruffle some feathers and upset some people. He claims his films don't have any political or social critique. They're just trashy exploitation films to basically ruffle feathers. Not quite sure whether he's completely serious or not. So we have nice art cards in the box, and we also have a nice little booklet which again has the artwork from the box set, and I can't show you all the pictures in it, but obviously there's some nice essays and there's some pictures that I can actually show. So there's still nudity in these films, but perhaps not as much naughty bits as would be in his sex films, which are available in a box set as well, of 3 of them. And there's also a couple of his kind of drama films, or in between the horror and the sexploitation films. So they are nicely in these 7 individual cases. There's new artwork similar to what's on the box and original artwork, and these are absolutely stacked releases. Born in 1939, unfortunately he's still with us, so he can actually contribute to these special features. There's interviews with him, and he comes across as being a thoroughly nice man, and very funny. And as we'll go into it, there is an absolute shed load of commentaries from people that I really enjoy listening to, so they have wonderful rewatchability. You know, again, are any of these films masterpieces? Not really, but they all have their own charm, which I'll get to. So I mean, if you're a fan of Hammer Horror and Amicus and Tygon and that sort of thing, then you should enjoy these Pete Walker films. There's something about British horror films of the 50s to the 80s that is just, there's a charm to them. So I'm not going to do these in chronological order or anything. So we'll start with The Comeback, which bizarrely stars Jack Jones, the kind of middle of the road American singer. So this is almost, how American actors or whatever would turn up in Italian films or Italian horror films, Italian gialli. This is kind of Pete Walker almost doing an Italian gialli. Jack Jones is a famous singer that comes over to England to try and record his latest album, his comeback album. But obviously there's strange things going on. His ex-wife ends up murdered. And there's all manner of chicanery going on. And this one is just a lot of fun. Again, as I said, there's original artwork on the inside as well that you can flip. But the new artwork's really strong. And really quite lovely. This one co-stars Pamela Stephenson, obviously a lot younger. Bill Owen from Last of the Summer Wine, if you're familiar with that sitcom from the UK, and Sheila Keith, who is really the star of this box set, who is an actor who's probably in her 50s or even 60s when Pete Walker started using her, and she is absolutely fantastic. Apparently she was one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, but many of the characters she appears in Pete Walker films are not nice at all. So again, this is a 1080 Blu-ray presentation. There's a commentary with Kim Newman, one of my favourites, Barry Forshaw and writer David McGilvray, who wrote quite a few Pete Walker films. And there's a commentary by Pete Walker and English Gothic author Jonathan Rigby, and they're from 2006. So I mean, that's, you can watch this film 3 times to get the Kim Newman Barry Forshaw commentary and Jonathan Rigby and Pete Walker himself. And there's Walker's Women, an interview with Pete Walker about the female actors he would use or found. And there's also the making of the comeback. So that's film 1. Then we have Die Screaming Marianne, starring Susan George. So this is from 1971, so it's the same year she did Straw Dogs. What a year that must have been for her. It also co-stars Judy Huxtable, who 3 years later would be married to Peter Cook, and was married to Peter Cook for 20 odd years. This one's a bit odd. It's almost like Pete Walker was trying to do an art house thriller. A lot of the other ones in the set, as far as the script, are really quite tight, but this one kind of meanders all over the place. So we find Susan George running away from somewhere on the continent. She's picked up by this guy in a car. They end up going to London, and he wants to marry her as soon as possible, but for some bizarre thing they go to the registry, and for some bizarre mistake she marries his best friend instead, which leads to the guy that was going to marry her falling out with her. But then he's employed by her father, who's a corrupt judge in Portugal somewhere, and her sister, who's a little bit twisted because Susan George knows the combination of a safety deposit box that her mother has, who's now dead, who died in an accident, has paperwork and also money that could make the judge go to prison for a long time, but there's also money in there as well. So everybody's plotting to find Susan George and get the combination out of her. But it's not actually as simple as that plot sounds. If that plot sounds simple, it's probably the least, well, it's certainly the least cohesive film in the set, and it's probably my least favourite as well. It's just not very well put together. It just doesn't really hang. As I said, it's almost as if he's trying to be a little bit art house with kind of the way the film's cut and how there's lots of information that's just never kind of given to the audience, and then somebody will just say something and it's just kind of skirted over. This is a 2K remaster. It's a high definition 1080. There's a commentary by film critic Sam Dane, and there's a commentary from 2006 with Pete Walker and Jonathan Rigby. There's also Tales of Terror, an interview with Pete Walker, and there's also a piece by, I think it's the assistant director. So again, I will be watching it again with the commentaries, but probably my least favourite out of the set. Probably my second least favourite, even though it's still fun. This is the Flesh and Blood show. Just trying to figure out what I can actually show. There's a sequence in 3D, so you actually get 2 pairs of 3D glasses, which is a nice little touch. Again, this is almost a jolly as well. A bunch of not very successful actors come down to a seaside town to rehearse for a play that's going to go to the West End, but the whole thing is a bit of a setup. It stars Ray Brooks, who people in the UK will certainly recognise from television. Jenny Hanley, she kind of plays a up and coming star who's just there for some theatre experience. But again, Jenny Hanley will be familiar to UK viewers. She did children's television and stuff like that. Luann Peters is in this, who should have really been bigger, because she was married to Peter Sellers at one point, and she is the Australian girl in Fawlty Towers that Basil Fawlty thinks her breast is a light switch. So it's good to see her getting Luann Peters is kind of in that bracket of female actors that were just used for their certain attributes and weren't actually given more meatier roles. Obviously Valerie Leon is kind of the poster girl for that. Valerie Leon should have had a much bigger career than just 30-second bit parts. Valerie Leon was in 2 Bond films. Like, one is a hotel receptionist. Valerie Leon should have had much bigger parts. So again, it becomes... There's a really nice sequence to the end of the film when we find out who the killer is, as they're bumping off these actors one by one in a dingy old theatre. It has its moments, but again, it doesn't have the pizzazz or ingenuity of the other films in the set. But again, it's still worth a giggle or two. Again, this is a 1080. There's a commentary with Jonathan Rigby and Kevin Lyons. That's another one of my favourite pairings. And there's an interview with actor Stuart Bevan, and it's an interview with third assistant director Terry Madden. So that's from 1972. Again, I would say that was solid, but the rest of the films are worth their weight in gold. Sorry, I've just realised I lied about Luann Peters being married to Peter Sellers. Lynn Frederick, who was in Phase 4, she was married to Peter Sellers before her early death, and she's in Schizo. I think it's safe to show that cover. Schizo is a lot of fun. So Lynn Frederick plays a newlywed who may have had a somewhat strange upbringing, and she thinks she's being stalked by her northern father. This is a film about the north-south divide in England. Stephanie Beacham, who's obviously a stalwart, who became really famous in Dynasty on American television. But Stephanie Beacham's in this. She's actually in 2 of these films. And again, John Fraser. So there's lots of like faces you'll recognise if you don't recognise the names. And again, this is a stalker film, but obviously there's a nice little twist. Again, some of these films have 70s endings. Some of them don't necessarily end the way they would end nowadays. They have little twists, but again, there's always a kind of good-natured. None of these films are really nasty or anything. Again, there's an element of Britishness in all of these films, despite the gore or nudity. Pete Walker talks about, he never saw the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for example, but he'd heard about it, so he kind of knew what was kind of coming, the slasher movement and stuff like that, but his films still had a kind of Britishness. He talks about, hearing about I Spit in Your Grave and thinking, oh, that sounds rather nasty and horrible. So that's the thing. There's a Britishness about these films, even though, obviously there's blood and guts and nudity, but it's still very much British. Again, this one has an audio commentary with Kim Newman, Barry Forshaw and the writer David McGilvray, and there's a Q&A with Pete Walker. This one's from 1976, and this one's rather wonderful. Again, Lynn Frederick sadly died way too young and didn't make that many films. Next up is arguably the best film in this set. This is so much fun. This is Frightmare. Again, a lot of these were released on Redemption Blu-ray, I think. And there's some Kino Lorber. Again, this one, that's kind of the more familiar cover for Frightmare. But I just like this new artwork. And this one's an absolute corker. This is from 1974. Again, it stars Rupert Davis, who again, Pete Walker loves using older actors that maybe people had forgotten about. But again, British horror films did that in the kind of 60s and 70s and 80s. And again, there's lots of people you'll recognise from TV and stuff, but they're actually making films. So Rupert Davis and Sheila Keith, who again is the MVP of this box set, and she steals the show in this one. So it's about an older couple, played by Davis and Keith, who are released from a mental institute, and their daughter, played by Deborah Fairfax, because she loves her father, she still has an arrangement where she goes off in the middle of the night to give her mother certain objects, which I'm not going to get into. Meanwhile, her younger sister is a bit of a tearaway and very difficult to control, so she's dealing with that as well. And then there's a male psychiatrist friend who offers to help, and then we find out more and more about her parents. But Sheila Keith's performance as somebody who may not necessarily be rehabilitated is just absolutely stunning. The nuances, it's just absolutely fantastic. And there's a wonderful moment using power tools. So I mean, that is certainly a highlight. If you haven't seen Frightmare before, I would highly recommend it. And then the last two are house films. So from 1974 we have House of Whipcord, which is absolutely wonderful as well. And this is the simple premise of what if somebody had a private prison? Again, this is where Pete Walker says, you know, my films aren't political, they're not socio-political, but this film starts with a quote about this is a film for people who want to see corporal and capital punishment back. So this is a film about people who have essentially, they have their own prison out in the middle of the countryside, and they are finding young women to rehabilitate through the power of abuse, basically. This again stars Ray Brooks, Anne Michelle, who I'm sure must be the sister of Vicky Michelle, who was on Allo Allo, the long-running BBC resistance sitcom. And this is about a girl who goes missing because she ends up in this prison, and her friends trying to find her and nobody believing them. Sheila Keith plays one of the guards, and again gives a wonderful performance. And the Barbara Markham, who plays the warden, again gives a brilliant performance. She was actually a vocal coach. She was an actor, but then she was a vocal coach for people like Marlon Brando and stuff, and then Pete Walker kind of convinced her to come back to acting, and she gives a brilliant performance as the unhinged warden. But again, it's that out in the middle of nowhere, the pleasant English countryside, but it's hiding horrors as these women are treated brutally, and if they do 3 strikes, it's not life imprisonment, it's something far more severe. It's just a lot of fun, and again, it's not political in any way, shape or form, of course, but it's absolutely fantastic. Again, it's a 2K remaster. There's an audio commentary with Kim Newman, Barry Forshaw and writer David McGilvray. Strangely enough, the best Pete Walker horror films in this set are written by David McGilvray. There's a commentary with Pete Walker, the DP Peter Jessup, moderated by Professor Stephen Chibnall from 2006. Courting Controversy, an insider's view of the films of Pete Walker. House of Walker, interview with Pete Walker, strangely enough. Return to the House of Whipcord, which goes to the location because it's still there. It's actually a police station, I think, and they have actually made one of the rooms into a museum to the House of Whipcord, which is a nice touch, which Pete Walker hasn't actually been to, but he's hoping to go one day. And there's a wonderful piece on Sheila Keith, A Nice Old Lady, ? Which is a beautiful little piece as well. So that's absolutely fantastic as well. That's House of Whipcord. And then finally we have House of Mortal Sin. Again, the titles are wonderful. And again, you get the original artwork, which in this case isn't really as good as the new artwork, I don't think. But this one is another absolute banger. It stars Anthony Sharp, who again you'll recognise from TV and British films, but it's got the double whammy of Susan Pengalian and Stephanie Beacham again. Obviously Sheila Keith's in it. Mervyn Johns has a nice little turn, who Dead of Night. This is 1975, 30 years later, and he gives a little turn as a bishop. And this is a film that will actually make you rage. I just got angrier and angrier because it's from 1976 and it's about a Catholic priest played by Anthony Sharp, who is perhaps doing things to young women that he shouldn't. And of course Susan Penhalgen thinks it's being done to her, but of course nobody will listen to her. So she lives with her sister Stephanie Beacham, and they happen to sleep together in the bed naked. I don't know what's going on there. And of course she doesn't listen to her. She thinks she's making it all up. There's a younger priest who has an eye for Stephanie Beacham, who wouldn't? And he doesn't believe her, and Anthony Sharp makes all these excuses about how she must be imagining it, and you do find yourself actually getting quite annoyed, because this is not a political film in any way, shape or form, according to Pete Walker. But this is how Catholic priests got away with the abuse of, children for all these years, because people would go, there's no way he would do that, because he's a man of God, he's a Catholic priest, there's no way any abuse or hanky-panky would be going on. And that's how they got away with it. Sheila Keith gives a brilliant performance again as Anthony Sharp's kind of house assistant, while he cares, and she cares for his mother as well. But the thing is, the writing's so good, you do actually, there's a sort of reason why Anthony Sharp's doing it. It's not to condone his behaviour, but you at least kind of get sort of reason in his mind why he's doing this. It's actually quite moving at times. But again, as Pete Walker says, this is just exploitation. It's not social, political in any way, shape or form. This is a commentary with Kim Newman, Barry Forshaw and the writer David McGilvray. Audio commentary with Sam Dane. Another audio commentary from 2006 with Pete Walker and Jonathan Rigby. Symphony of Horror interview with Pete Walker. And Actor Confessions interview with actors Norman Eshley, again you'll recognise from British TV, and Stuart Bevan. And again, this is another absolute corker. It could almost be a documentary about how the certain people in certain churches got away with stuff for years, because pretty much nobody believed the victims. And that's the set. Again, I was really surprised at how good these were. There's a couple of them that are okay, but there's at least 4 of them that are really, really good, really, really enjoyable. And again, the longest one's about an hour and 45. There's lots of wonderful moments, great effects for the time and for the budget, and again, just a stack of extras. Again, I'll be revisiting these and listening to the commentaries, because again, Kim Newman and Jonathan Rigby are always fantastic. I would highly recommend it. I mean, maybe it will go down in price, but again, I'm guessing they'll probably release them individually. As I said, they're already, I think Redemption has released most of them, but again, these are new 2K or 1080p transfers. So might not recommend buying the entire box, but I'm sure you'll be able to get the individual ones at some point. I'm guessing the box probably will sell out, because it's a lovely bit of cardboard. But again, you can pick up the individual films at some point. I'm guessing 88 Films will release them individually. So that's the surprisingly good, as far as I'm concerned, the Flesh and Blood show. But again, I enjoy Hammer films and Amicus films and Tygon. If that's not your bag, then you probably won't enjoy these. But if you do enjoy those kind of films, it's British history. It's not just horror films. It's British history you're buying when you buy Hammer and Amicus and Pete Walker films. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen any of these Pete Walker films and what you think of it. And hopefully you'll join me again for more episodes of In the Frame. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.